Our daughter is a thief, and we have proof. That's what my father said, standing at the head of the Thanksgiving table, in front of 30 relatives, holding a white envelope like it was a verdict he'd been rehearsing for weeks. He slid it across the table to me. A court summons. Every eye in that dining room locked on my face. My mother was already crying, her favorite weapon, loaded and ready. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at my father. And I smiled. Because 4 months earlier, I'd hired someone whose entire job is tracing where money disappears. And what they found didn't just clear my name. It blew apart a lie my parents had been building since the day my grandfather died. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm Ophelia, I'm 32, and I'm a registered nurse from a small town in Georgia. Now let me take you back 8 months, to the week my grandfather Earl Palmer was buried. My grandfather Earl Palmer died on a Tuesday in March. He was 84. Pneumonia, they said. Quick, at the end. I drove 3 hours from my apartment to the funeral home in Dawson, Georgia, population 4,000 give or take. The kind of town where everyone knows your maiden name and your credit score. I grew up there. My grandfather raised me half the time. He taught me to read sitting on his porch. Took me fishing every summer at Lake Blackshear until I was 15 and thought I was too cool for it. When I got accepted into nursing school, he mailed me a card with a $50 check inside. The memo line said, "Proud of you, Ophi," but the last 3 years of his life, I barely heard from him. I called. He didn't answer. I sent letters, birthday cards, photos from work, a Christmas note every December. Nothing came back. No reply. No returned mail either. Just silence. I told myself he was getting older, maybe confused, maybe angry about something I couldn't remember doing. At the funeral, my father Gerald stood at the front of the chapel and delivered a eulogy that could have won an award. Tears in his eyes, voice cracking at the right moments. "My father was the greatest man I ever knew," he said, gripping the podium. I sat in the 3rd row. Nobody asked me to sit closer. After the service, Gerald gathered us in the church hallway. Me, my brother Nolan, a few cousins. He straightened his tie and said, "Dad left everything to me. The house, the savings, all of it. That was his final wish." No one questioned him. I almost didn't either. But something about the way he said it, too smooth, too rehearsed, sat wrong in my chest, like a number on a chart that doesn't match the patient. Let me back up 10 years. I was 22, fresh out of nursing school, working my first job at the county hospital. 12-hour shifts, student loans already breathing down my neck. I was sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with another nurse and eating frozen burritos 3 nights a week. My father called me on a Sunday evening, said he needed me to come to the house. When I got there, he was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. My mother Denise sat beside him, eyes already red. "We need your help, sweetheart," Gerald said. "Just your signature. The bank needs a co-signer for the mortgage. It's temporary. 6 months, maybe less. Then I refinance and your name comes off." Denise dabbed her eyes. "We could lose the house, Ophelia." So I signed. 6 months became a year became 5, 5 became 10. Every time I brought it up, the conversation went the same way. "Dad, when are you refinancing?" "My credit's not there yet. You want us on the street?" And my mother would cry. Every single time, like clockwork. Here's what that signature cost me. I couldn't qualify for my own mortgage. I couldn't get approved for a car loan without a brutal interest rate. My credit score bounced between 580 and 620 because Gerald was late on payments, sometimes 30 days, sometimes 60, and never once told me. I found out from a credit monitoring alert at 2 in the morning. 2 60-day lates I never knew about. My score had dropped 40 points overnight. I called him the next day. He said, "Things were tight. I handled it." He handled it. With my name. 2 weeks after the funeral, I sat Gerald down at his kitchen table and said it plainly. "Dad, I need my name off that mortgage, this year." No tears, no yelling, just a fact. Gerald leaned back in his chair. "Now's not the time, Ophelia. I just buried my father." "I know, and I'm sorry, but this has been 10 years. His jaw tightened. "You want me to refinance right now? With what credit? You think banks are lining up for a 61-year-old retired insurance man?" "Then sell the house. Downsize. I don't care how, but I need off that loan. He stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. You want to talk about lawyers? You want to sue your own parents? Go ahead. See how that looks. I didn't say anything about lawyers. He added that himself. That night, my mother made 8 phone calls. I know because 4 different relatives called me within 3 days. Aunt Marlene texted, "Your parents raised you and this is how you repay them? Shame on you, Ophelia." My cousin Megan left a voicemail. "Hey, I heard you're threatening to take your parents' house. What's going on?" My father's cousin Danny called and said, "Family doesn't do this to family." Every one of them had the same version of the story, the version Gerald and Denise fed them. Ophelia is ungrateful. Ophelia wants to take the house. Ophelia is turning on her own parents right after they lost Earl. Nobody called to ask my side. Then Gerald called me one last time. His voice was flat, cold. "You think you're the only one who can play this game? Your grandfather left everything to me, and if you keep pushing, everyone's gonna know what you really did with his money." I had no idea what he meant. I hadn't touched a dime, but he was already building the story. I sat in my car outside the hospital after a 12-hour night shift and did the math on the back of a pharmacy receipt. If Gerald stopped paying the mortgage entirely, which he'd threatened before, during arguments, the bank would come after both of us. Foreclosure. My credit wouldn't just drop, it would crater, below 500, for years. Some hospitals run credit checks on employees. Not all, but some. Mine did. A foreclosure on my record could flag a review. I could lose my job, the only stable thing I had. If I took over the payments myself to protect my credit, $1,800 a month on a nurse's salary in rural Georgia, I'd be broke inside of 18 months. I was already paying rent, student loans, car insurance, groceries. There was no margin. And if I pushed back publicly? Gerald had already poisoned the well. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin believed I was the ungrateful daughter trying to steal her parents' home. Fighting back meant fighting alone. Then I pulled up the mortgage account online. I still had login access from years ago when Gerald asked me to keep an eye on things. That's when I saw it. A new line, a home equity withdrawal, $40,000, taken out 3 months before Grandpa Earl died. Gerald hadn't just kept my name on the mortgage. He'd used my co-signature to borrow more money against the house, without telling me, without my consent. $40,000 I never saw, never approved, now tied to my name. I sat there for a long time. The parking lot was empty. The receipt was full of numbers that didn't add up. He didn't just trap me. He went back to the trap and made it deeper. The rumors didn't start with a bang. They started with whispers. Gerald and Denise began telling family, casually, like it was common knowledge, that I had taken cash from Grandpa Earl's house before he died. "She went over there alone a few times near the end," Gerald told people. "We found the dresser drawer empty afterward, thousands of dollars gone." There was no proof. There didn't need to be. In a town like Dawson, a father's word carries weight. My cousin Travis called me. "Hey, Uncle Gerald said you took some money from Grandpa's dresser? A few thousand? What's that about?" "That never happened, Travis." "Okay, I'm just telling you what he said." That was the pattern. Nobody accused me directly. They just passed along what they heard. And every time I denied it, I sounded more defensive, which made me sound more guilty. At church the following Sunday, First Baptist, where my family had attended for 30 years, a woman named Mrs. Gentry looked right at me, then turned her back and walked to the other side of the fellowship hall. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. At work, a nurse on my unit pulled me aside. "Everything okay at home? I heard something from my neighbor about your family and some legal stuff." It was leaking into my professional life now. That's when it clicked. Gerald wasn't just covering his tracks. He was building a narrative. If anyone ever questioned the inheritance, he wanted the whole town already primed to believe one thing: Ophelia is the thief. But he slipped. He mentioned the dresser drawer. Specific. Too specific. How did he know Grandpa kept cash in a dresser drawer? Unless he'd been in that drawer himself. I drove 45 minutes to the county courthouse on my day off, parked in the back lot, walked in wearing scrubs I hadn't changed out of because I'd come straight from a shift. The clerk at the probate office was a woman named Diane, with reading glasses on a beaded chain. I told her I needed a copy of the probate file for Earl James Palmer, deceased March of this year. Relation? She asked. Granddaughter. She didn't hesitate. Probate records are public. Anyone can request them. She printed the file and handed it to me in a manila folder. I sat on a bench in the courthouse hallway and opened it. The will was there, the one Gerald had filed, typed, notarized, dated 14 months before Grandpa died. It said, "I leave all real and personal property to my son, Gerald Ray Palmer. All of it, the house, the savings accounts, everything." I read it twice. Then I looked at the signature at the bottom. Earl James Palmer. I'd seen my grandfather's handwriting hundreds of times, on birthday cards every year, on the memo line of every Christmas check, on a note he left in my lunchbox once when I was 9 that said, "You're smarter than you think, Ophi." His handwriting was shaky but specific. The E always leaned left, the P had a long tail. It was as familiar to me as my own. The signature on that will was close, but it wasn't his. The E was too upright, the P too short. The whole thing was too careful, like someone trying very hard to copy something they'd only seen a few times. I took a photo of the signature with my phone. My hands were steady. I wasn't sad anymore. I was certain. I opened my phone and typed into the search bar, "forensic accountant near me." The call came on a Wednesday night. I was eating leftover soup at my kitchen counter when Gerald's name lit up my screen. I almost didn't answer. "Thanksgiving at Marlene's," he said. No hello. "You're coming." "I'll think about it." "No, you will be there, and you'll apologize." I set my spoon down. "Apologize for what?" "For what you stole, in front of everyone." "I didn't steal anything, Dad." "Then you won't mind proving it." A pause. Then, "See you Thursday." He hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, holding the phone against my thigh. The soup got cold. I didn't touch it again. Gerald wasn't inviting me to dinner. He was building a courtroom. 20 minutes later, my mother texted. The message was long, 4 paragraphs of her usual language, words like healing and closure, and as a family. The last line read, "Your father just wants to resolve this privately. Don't make it bigger than it needs to be, privately, in front of 30 people." I learned later that Gerald had called 10 additional relatives, people who normally skipped Thanksgiving, second cousins, a great aunt from Macon, Denise's college roommate. He wanted the room full. He wanted witnesses, not witnesses to the truth, witnesses to the performance. I sat on my couch that night and stared at the ceiling. I had a choice. I could skip Thanksgiving, stay home, let Gerald tell whatever story he wanted to an audience that already believed him, or I could walk into that room and face whatever he'd prepared. I thought about my grandfather. About 3 years of silence that wasn't silence at all. It was sabotage. I texted Gerald back one word. Coming. Denise called Nolan the next day. I know because Nolan called me an hour later, sounding like a man standing on a bridge trying to figure out which side to jump to. "What's going on, Ophelia? Mom says you took money from Grandpa?" "Did you ever see me take anything, Nolan?" A beat. "No." "Did I ever mention Grandpa's money to you? Ever?" "No, but Mom's really upset." "Mom's upset because I asked Dad to refinance the mortgage. That's all this is." He went quiet. Nolan was 28, an electrician, lived 12 minutes from our parents. He'd watched me carry that mortgage for a decade without complaining. He knew what it cost me. He just never said anything about it, because in our family, you didn't question Gerald. You absorbed it and moved on. "They want me to stand with them at Thanksgiving," he said. "Mom said the family needs to be united." "United against who? Me?" He didn't answer that. "I'm not asking you to pick a side, Nolan. Just keep your eyes open." More silence. Then quietly, "I'll be there, but I'm not giving any speeches." I told him that was enough. We hung up, but something stuck with me. The pause before he said no, when I asked if he'd seen me take anything. It wasn't the pause of someone uncertain about the answer. It was the pause of someone who wanted to say something else entirely, something heavier, and swallowed it instead. I didn't push. I figured if Nolan had something to tell me, he'd find the moment. I just didn't know the moment was already 2 months old, sitting in his phone, recorded in a kitchen he was never supposed to be in. Linda Marsh had an office above a hardware store in Cordelli, 20 minutes south of Dawson, forensic accountant, 15 years of experience tracing money through estates, divorces, and small business fraud. I found her through a Google search at 2 in the morning and booked the appointment before I could talk myself out of it. She was calm, gray hair, reading glasses, a desk covered in folders. She didn't react when I told her the story. She just took notes. 4 months later, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I was back in her office. She placed a bound report on the desk between us. The signature on the file doesn't match, she said. I compared it to 17 other verified documents, tax returns, bank cards, a vehicle title from 2014. It's not his hand. You're sure? I'm sure. She flipped to the financial section. Earl's savings account held $280,000 at the time of his death. The house appraised at roughly $190,000. Total estate value, approximately $470,000. After probate closed, Gerald withdrew $350,000 across several transactions. Linda had mapped every dollar. $120,000 paid off Gerald's personal credit card debt. $85,000 went to an outstanding truck loan. $60,000 was transferred to an account under Denise's name. $45,000 paid a contractor for home renovations. $40,000 was pulled in cash, untraceable. I stared at the numbers. He forged the will, I said, and took $350,000. Linda nodded. Do you want me to compile this into a formal report? Because once I do, this becomes something you can't walk back. I didn't hesitate. Do it. She closed the folder. I'll have it ready in 10 days. 10 days. That would be 3 days before Thanksgiving. $350,000. That wasn't desperation. That was a plan. My grandfather used to mention his sister Ruth now and then, usually in passing. Ruth's got more sense than the rest of us combined, he'd say, shaking his head like it was both a compliment and a complaint. Ruth Palmer, 74, lived alone in a clapboard house in Americus, 40 minutes south. She hadn't come to a family dinner in 9 years, some falling out with Gerald that no one explained and everyone accepted. I found her number in Grandpa's old address book, which I'd kept in a shoebox after the funeral. I called on a Thursday evening, half expecting the line to be disconnected. She picked up on the second ring. Mrs. Palmer? This is Ophelia, Earl's granddaughter. Silence. Long enough that I thought I'd lost the connection. Then softly. Earl told me you'd call one day. The air left my lungs. What do you mean? Your grandpa gave me something 3 years ago, told me to keep it safe, said if anything went wrong after he passed, you'd come looking. She invited me to her house that Saturday. I drove down with my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my fingers. Ruth met me at the door. She didn't hug me. She just looked at me for a long moment, then handed me a yellowed envelope. Inside was a handwritten will. Earl's real handwriting. Shaky, leaning, unmistakable. Witnessed by 2 neighbors, dated 5 years before his death. The contents were simple. Everything divided equally among 4 grandchildren, Ophelia, Nolan, Travis, and Megan. I looked up at Ruth. She sat down heavily. Gerald came to your grandpa's house every week those last 3 years. Told Earl you didn't want to see him anymore, said you'd moved on. My grandfather didn't stop calling me. Gerald stopped him. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. 10:14 p.m., Nolan's name on my screen. I need to tell you something, he said. His voice was low, rushed, like a man talking in a room he wasn't supposed to be in. Don't ask how I know. Okay. 2 months ago, I went to the house to grab my drill set from the garage. I came through the side door. Mom and Dad were in the kitchen. They didn't hear me come in. He paused. I could hear him breathing. Dad was saying, I'm going to tell you exactly what he said. She can't prove anything. The will is filed. It's done. I gripped the edge of my couch cushion. And then Mom said, but what if she gets a lawyer? And Dad said, then we go louder. We make her the villain. Nobody's gonna believe her over us. Silence on both ends. Nolan, tell me you recorded that. I hit record the second I heard them arguing. I have the whole thing. He sent me the audio file while we were still on the phone. I played it. Gerald's voice filled my apartment. Muffled, tinny, but unmistakable. Denise's too. Every word exactly as Nolan described. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time, then, "Because I was scared, Ophelia. They're my parents too. I didn't know what to do with it." I understood that. I really did. Fear doesn't always look like shaking hands. Sometimes it looks like 2 months of silence, carrying a recording on your phone like a grenade you don't know how to throw. "Thank you," I said. "That took guts. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not going to Thanksgiving empty-handed." The estate attorney's name was Harlan Bates. Small office on Main Street in Albany. Wood-paneled walls, a University of Georgia diploma, and a handshake that meant something. I laid everything on his desk. Linda Marsh's forensic report, the handwritten will from Aunt Ruth, the probate file from the courthouse, and the audio recording from Nolan. He spent 40 minutes reading, didn't say a word until he was finished. Then he looked up. "This is fraud, clear as day. Forged signature, falsified probate filing, misappropriation of estate assets. You have standing to challenge the will and file a civil claim. If the DA's office picks it up, it could go criminal." "I'm not suing anyone. Not yet. I just need to be ready." He nodded slowly. "Ready for what, exactly?" "My father is planning something for Thanksgiving. I don't know what, but I know him. He won't let this go quietly." Harlan assembled a packet for me, a summary of the forensic findings, a certified copy of the original will, and a printout of the account transfers showing where the $350,000 went. He put it all in a large manila envelope and sealed it. "If you ever need to use this," he said, "it speaks for itself." I put the envelope in my bag. That evening I called Aunt Ruth. "Would you come to Thanksgiving at Marlene's?" Silence. Then, "I haven't been to a family dinner in 9 years." "I know." Another pause. "For Earl, I'll be there." I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed. The envelope was in my bag by the door. If Gerald said nothing at Thanksgiving, it would stay there, sealed, untouched. But I knew my father. Silence had never been his style. "Okay, I need to pause here for a second. This part isn't in the story. This is just me, talking to you." Sitting in that lawyer's office, holding that envelope, I almost backed out. Almost put it back on his desk and said, "Forget it." Because part of me, the part that spent 32 years being Gerald Palmer's daughter, still wanted to believe there was an explanation. That maybe I had it wrong. But here's my question for you. If you had the proof in your hands, would you bring it to Thanksgiving? Or would you keep the peace? Let me know in the comments. All right. Thanksgiving morning. Aunt Marlene's house sat on a half-acre lot on Pinewood Drive, a white ranch style with black shutters and an American flag on the porch. The driveway was already full when I pulled up at 1:15. Trucks, sedans, a minivan with a car seat in back. Someone had taped paper turkeys to the front door. Inside, 3 long tables pushed together down the center of the living room, covered in mismatched tablecloths. 32 place settings. The smell of roasted turkey and cornbread dressing hit me before I cleared the doorway. I stepped in and the room shifted. Not loudly, not obviously, but I felt it. A half-second pause in conversation. A few heads turning. Someone near the kitchen glanced at me and looked away fast. Everyone here had heard the rumors. Everyone had already picked a side. Aunt Marlene hugged me at the door. "Good to see you, honey." But her arms were stiff, and she let go a beat too soon. Gerald sat at the head of the center table, navy blazer, pressed shirt, dressed up, which was unusual for Thanksgiving. Denise was beside him in a cream-colored sweater, hands folded, eyes already glistening. They looked like a couple posing for a church directory photo. Gerald saw me and smiled. Not warmth, satisfaction. The smile of a man who's already rehearsed the next 2 hours. Aunt Ruth arrived 15 minutes later. She came through the side door quietly and sat at the far end of the table. Nobody greeted her. Most of the younger cousins didn't even recognize her. 9 years is a long time. Nolan was in the middle of the table, staring at his empty plate like it held the answers to something. I set my bag under my chair. The envelope pressed against my ankle. The turkey was carved. The prayer was said. And Gerald waited. We were 20 minutes into the meal when Gerald tapped his knife against his water glass. The room went quiet in layers. The adults first, then the teenagers, then the kids at the folding table near the window. Someone turned down the football game on the TV in the den. Gerald stood. He placed both hands on the table, leaned forward slightly, and looked around the room like a man about to deliver a sermon. "Before we go around and say what we're thankful for," he began, "I need to address something that's been weighing on this family." My pulse climbed, but I didn't move. He looked at Denise. She dabbed her eyes with a napkin, right on cue. "Most of you have heard the rumors," Gerald continued. "I wish I didn't have to do this publicly. Believe me, Denise and I tried to handle it privately, but our daughter left us no choice." He paused for effect. A few relatives shifted in their seats. Uncle Danny set down his fork. "After my father passed, we discovered that a significant amount of money was missing from his accounts. We looked into it, we traced it, and the evidence points to one person in this room." He turned to me. 32 faces followed his gaze. "Our daughter Ophelia is a thief." His voice didn't waver. "And we have proof." The room held its breath. Aunt Marlene's hand went to her mouth. Cousin Megan stared at me wide-eyed. A great aunt I barely knew whispered to the woman beside her, "Oh my God!" Denise's crying grew louder, perfectly timed, perfectly pitched. Gerald stood over me like a judge at sentencing, and the entire room waited for me to crumble. I didn't. I folded my hands on the table and looked him in the eye. Gerald reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a white envelope, crisp, official-looking. He walked slowly around the table, past Uncle Danny, past Cousin Travis, past Aunt Marlene, until he stood right beside my chair. He set the envelope in front of me. "This is a court summons," he said, loud enough for every person in the room. "We are suing you for the return of our father's money." I picked it up. The room was so quiet I could hear the kids whispering at the folding table. I opened the flap and pulled out the document inside. It looked real. At first glance, a header with the county court's name, a date, a defendant line with my full legal name, a signature at the bottom from someone I'd never heard of. But I'd spent 4 months sitting across from a lawyer. I knew what a real summons looked like. This one had no case number, no clerk's stamp. The font was wrong, too clean, too uniform. It was printed on regular copy paper, not filed stock. It was fake. Gerald had someone mock this up to scare me in front of 32 witnesses. I looked at the document. Then I set it down, gently, next to my plate. Uncle Danny leaned forward. "Gerald, if you need legal support, I know a good attorney." A cousin's wife was shaking her head. Aunt Marlene looked like she might cry. Denise was still going, real tears now, mixed with the performance ones, impossible to tell apart. Gerald crossed his arms and waited. He expected me to deny, to cry, to beg, to storm out. That was the script. That was the version of me he'd sold to everyone in this room. I looked up at him. "Are you done?" I stood up, slowly, no rush. I smoothed the napkin on the table beside my plate like I was finishing a meal at a restaurant. Every person in that room was watching. The football game was muted now. Even the kids at the folding table had gone silent. "I want everyone here to remember something," I said. My voice was steady. I wasn't performing. I was past that. "I didn't start this. Dad did." I turned to face Gerald directly. "So I'm going to ask you one question, Dad, in front of everyone, and I want a clear answer." Gerald's chin lifted, defiant, still in control, or so he believed. "Did Grandpa Earl write that will?" "Of course he did." "You're sure?" His eyes narrowed. "Are you calling me a liar? In front of my whole family?" I didn't answer that. I let the question hang in the air like smoke. Then I bent down and reached under my chair. My fingers found the bag. Inside it, the manila envelope, heavy, sealed, 4 months in the making. I placed it on the table, right next to his fake summons. The room didn't move. Gerald stared at the envelope. It was thick. It was real. And for the first time all night, something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker, fast, like a candle caught in a draft. I looked at him. "Funny," I said. "So do I." Nobody spoke. Gerald's smile was gone. Not slowly. All at once, like someone had reached inside his face and pulled it off. I unsealed the envelope. Denise stopped crying, and 32 people leaned forward. I pulled the first page from the envelope and held it up. This, I said, is a side-by-side comparison of the signature on the will Dad filed in probate, and 17 verified signatures from Grandpa Earl. Tax returns, bank documents, a vehicle title, all confirmed authentic. I passed the page to Aunt Marlene, who was closest. She put on her reading glasses. The left column showed the signature from Gerald's will. The right showed Earl's real handwriting. 17 samples, all consistent. The slanting E, the long-tailed P, the way his hand shook more in recent years but kept the same rhythm. The signature on Gerald's will was stiff, upright, careful. A copy made by someone trying too hard. Marlene's lips parted. She looked up at Gerald, then back at the page, then passed it to Uncle Danny without a word. A forensic accountant examined these samples, I said. Her professional conclusion is that the signature on the probate will is forged. That's a lie. Gerald's voice came out louder than he intended. A few people flinched. You paid someone to make that up. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not asking anyone to believe me, I said. I'm asking you to look. The page moved down the table, person by person. I watched their faces change. Confusion, then recognition, then something harder. Uncle Danny held the page up to the light and shook his head slowly. Travis stared at it for a long time, then set it down and pushed it to the next person without looking at Gerald. Denise hadn't touched her napkin in 2 minutes. She was watching Gerald, not with sorrow, with fear. I reached into the envelope for the second document. I pulled out a single handwritten page, yellowed, creased, familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. This is Grandpa Earl's real will, I said. Written in his own hand, witnessed by 2 neighbors, dated 5 years before he died. I read the keyline aloud. I leave all real and personal property to be divided equally among my 4 grandchildren, Ophelia, Nolan, Travis, and Megan. Not Gerald, not his son, his grandchildren. Gerald took a step back. Where did you get that? That isn't legitimate. And then Aunt Ruth stood up. She'd been sitting at the far end of the table, so quiet most people had forgotten she was there. She was 74, small, silver-haired, wearing a church dress she probably hadn't worn in years. The room turned. Earl gave it to me, Ruth said. Her voice was thin but clear. 3 years ago. Sat me down at my kitchen table, handed me this envelope and said, "Keep this safe, Ruth, because I don't trust my own son." Nobody breathed. Gerald. Ruth, you don't know what you're... I'm not finished. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Gerald went to your grandpa's house every week those last 3 years, told Earl that Ophelia didn't want to see him anymore, told him she'd moved on, cut off the phone calls, returned the letters. She looked at me. Earl died thinking his granddaughter forgot him. I felt the room shift. Not toward me, not toward Gerald, but toward something none of them had prepared for. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was the sound of 32 people recalculating everything they'd been told. Gerald's face was white. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Denise whispered to no one. Oh, God. I pulled the last page from the envelope. After probate closed, Dad withdrew $350,000 from Grandpa's accounts. I held the sheet so the room could see the columns. This is where every dollar went. I read it slowly, no emotion, just numbers. $120,000, Dad's personal credit card debt. $85,000, an outstanding loan on his truck. $60,000, transferred into an account under Mom's name. $45,000, paid to a contractor for renovations on their house. $40,000, withdrawn in cash. Destination unknown. I set the page down. That's $350,000 that belonged to 4 grandchildren, not 1 son. Gerald grabbed the back of his chair. That's my father's money. He left it to me, legally. No, Dad. I kept my voice level. He left it to us, all 4 of us. You forged his will to take it. The room was so still I could hear the clock on Marlene's mantel ticking. Someone at the far end of the table, I think it was Danny's wife, set her glass down and pushed her chair back slowly, like she was trying to leave without making a sound. Travis was staring at the tablecloth, jaw tight. Megan had her hand over her mouth. Aunt Marlene picked up her napkin, folded it once, placed it beside her plate, and pushed her chair out. She didn't stand. She just separated. Inches of distance, that meant everything. Uncle Danny, the same man who 5 minutes ago offered Gerald a lawyer, turned in his seat. "Gerald," his voice was careful. "Is this true?" Gerald looked at him, then at Marlene, then at Denise, who had stopped crying entirely and was staring at the table like it might open up and swallow her. He didn't answer. Gerald's eyes swept the room, searching for someone, anyone, still on his side. He found no one. "She's manipulating all of you." His voice cracked on the second word. These are fabricated. She paid people to..." "Then explain the money, Dad." I didn't shout. I didn't need to. $350,000. Where did it go? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing. That's when Nolan stood up. Every head in the room turned. Nolan, 28, quiet, the one who never took sides, was standing at the middle of the table with his phone in his hand. "I heard them," he said. His voice was tight, like he was holding it together with both fists. 2 months ago, in the kitchen. They didn't know I was in the garage." He looked at Gerald, then at Denise. "Dad said, 'She can't prove anything. The will is filed. It's done.'" Gerald, "Nolan, don't." And Mom said, "But what if she gets a lawyer?" And Dad said, "Then we go louder. We make her the villain. Nobody's gonna believe her over us." Nolan tapped his phone screen and set it on the table. Gerald's voice filled the room, muffled, recorded through a garage wall, but every word clear enough to land. "She can't prove anything. The will is filed. It's done." Then Denise's voice. "But what if she gets a lawyer?" Then Gerald again. "Then we go louder. We make her the villain." The recording ended. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Gerald sat down, heavily, like the bones in his legs had quit. Denise said barely above a whisper, "I told you this would happen." Not grief, not shame, anger, directed at Gerald. She'd known. She'd warned him. And now the room knew she'd known too. I want to be honest with you here. Standing in that room, watching my father's face collapse, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Because this wasn't a courtroom drama. This was Thanksgiving. These were people I'd loved my entire life. But I learned something that day. Love doesn't mean letting someone dismantle you. And silence isn't peace. It's just permission. Quick question for you. Do you think Nolan did the right thing by waiting 2 months? Or should he have told me the day he heard it? I'm genuinely curious. Drop your take below. All right, let me tell you what happened after that dinner. Nobody ate dessert. People left in waves. First the outer ring of distant relatives, then the cousins, then the uncles. Most didn't say goodbye to Gerald. They just picked up their coats and walked out. A few hugged me on the porch. Travis gripped my hand and said, "We'll talk this week." Megan found me by the driveway. If that will is real, and I think it is, we were all robbed. All 4 of us. "I know," I said. "I'm not telling anyone what to do. But the forensic report is as much yours as it is mine. I want a copy. I'll send it tomorrow." Within a week, Travis and Megan had retained their own attorney. They filed a petition with the probate court to reopen Earl Palmer's estate based on evidence of signature forgery and the existence of a prior valid will. I wasn't the one who filed. The cousins made that decision themselves. I gave them the information. They acted on it. There's a difference, and it matters to me. The attorney also reviewed Gerald's fake summons, the one he'd slid across the table like it was a live grenade. No case number. No clerk's filing stamp. Not on record with any court in the state of Georgia. It was printed paper in a white envelope. A prop. Travis's lawyer put it bluntly. Your father tried to intimidate you with a document that has the legal weight of a restaurant menu. Gerald hadn't filed anything. He'd staged a performance with a piece of paper that wouldn't survive 10 seconds in front of a judge. He tried to scare me into silence using a fake. But the real paperwork, the kind that actually holds up. That was in my envelope. Harlan Bates sent a certified letter to Gerald Palmer on a Monday, 9 days after Thanksgiving. The letter was straightforward. Ophelia Palmer demands that Gerald Palmer refinance the mortgage on the property at 412 Talmadge Road and remove her name as co-signer within 60 calendar days. Failure to comply would result in a civil lawsuit for damages related to unauthorized use of her co-signature, including the $40,000 home equity withdrawal she never consented to. Gerald, now facing a probate challenge from 3 grandchildren, potential criminal exposure, and the complete evaporation of his reputation in a town where everyone now knew what he'd done, did not fight it. He refinanced in 5 weeks. I got the notification from the bank on a Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in the hospital break room eating a granola bar between patients when my phone buzzed. The email was short. My name had been removed from the mortgage, effective immediately. I sat there for a long time. A coworker asked me if I was okay. I said yes. Then I walked out to my car in the parking lot, sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, and cried. Not from joy, not exactly. From the release of something I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was heavy. 10 years of someone else's debt attached to my name. 10 years of phone calls about refinancing that never happened. 10 years of watching my credit score drop because a man who called himself my father couldn't be bothered to pay on time. Gone. In 5 weeks. I pulled up my credit report on my phone. It had already started climbing. 640, then 680. The banker told me it would reach 710 within 6 months. Not perfect, but mine. Aunt Ruth called me a week before Christmas. Come by Saturday, I have something for you. I drove to Americus on a gray December morning. Ruth's house smelled like coffee and cedar. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a shoebox in front of her. These are yours, she said. Earl wanted you to have them. Inside the box were letters, 11 of them, written by my grandfather over the last 3 years of his life. He'd written them to me, one every few months, and mailed them to Ruth because he knew Gerald was intercepting everything that went to my address or phone. I opened the first one. The handwriting was shaky, the paper creased, dated 3 years before he died. Ophi, your daddy told me you don't want to see me anymore. I don't believe it. But if it's true, I want you to know I'm not angry. I just miss you. I opened the last one. Written 2 months before he passed. I'm leaving the house and the savings to you kids. All 4 of you. If your father does something different, find Ruth. She's got the real one. I love you, Ophi. I always did. I set the letter down on Ruth's kitchen table and pressed my palms flat against the wood. The grain was cold under my fingers. I focused on that. The cold, the texture. Because if I didn't anchor myself to something physical, I was going to dissolve. He never stopped writing to me. For 3 years, he wrote letters he knew I'd never receive, and sent copies to the one person he trusted to hold the truth. Ruth poured me a cup of coffee. Neither of us spoke for a while. He didn't leave me money. He left me proof that he never gave up. In a small town, you don't need a press conference. You just need one Thanksgiving dinner. By the first week of December, every family in our circle, and most of the congregation at First Baptist, knew what Gerald and Denise had done. Not because I told them. I didn't have to. 32 people sat in that room. At least half of them went home and told someone. Those people told someone else. That's how it works in Dawson. Gerald and Denise stopped getting invited to things. No Christmas party at the Gentrys. No New Year's potluck at the church hall. Aunt Marlene, Denise's own sister, called her 3 days after Thanksgiving and said, I don't know exactly what you two did, but don't call me for a while. I need time. Denise tried to post a family update on Facebook, something about false accusations and a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Within an hour, Travis commented with a link to the public probate filing. Denise deleted the post by dinner time. At church, Gerald shook hands with the pastor after the service like he always did, but the people who used to linger and chat moved on quickly. No one was rude, no one confronted him. They just shortened things. Fewer words, less eye contact. The invisible arithmetic of a small town adjusting its ledger. Mrs. Gentry, the woman who'd turned her back on me months ago in the fellowship hall, found me in the grocery store parking lot one Saturday. She touched my arm and said, "I owe you an apology, honey. I believed the wrong person." I told her I understood, because I did. Nobody banished Gerald and Denise. Nobody had to. In a small town, silence is the loudest sentence. The probate court accepted the petition to reopen Earl Palmer's estate in January. It moved faster than I expected. The judge reviewed the forensic signature analysis, the original handwritten will with 2 living witnesses, and the financial records showing the $350,000 in disbursements. She appointed an independent handwriting expert to evaluate the signatures. The expert's conclusion matched Linda Marsh's. The signature on the filed will was not Earl Palmer's. With the probate case reopened, Gerald now faced 2 tracks of consequences. The first was civil. The court would order the redistribution of estate assets according to the original will. 4 grandchildren, equal shares. The second was criminal. Forging a will in Georgia is a felony, estate fraud. The district attorney's office opened a preliminary review. No charges yet. These things take time. But the file was open and the evidence was clear. Gerald's lawyer advised him to negotiate. Gerald didn't have much leverage left. The house on Earl's property, the one he'd been so desperate to keep, had to be listed for sale. The proceeds, combined with whatever remained in the accounts, would be redistributed. After legal fees, each grandchild received approximately $82,000. Not a life-changing fortune. But not nothing either. Travis used his share to pay off his truck. Megan put hers toward her daughter's college fund. Nolan hadn't decided yet. I kept mine in a savings account and didn't touch it for 2 months. I wanted to make sure it felt clean before I spent $1, that it wasn't anger money or revenge money, just what Grandpa Earl intended, a share of what he'd built, passed down to the people he loved. Gerald spent $350,000 trying to live a life he couldn't afford. It cost him everything he had left. Nolan called me the week after Thanksgiving. It was the first time in years he'd called without it being about our parents. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," he said. "You told me when it mattered. That's enough." We started meeting every Sunday morning at a diner on Route 19, a little place called Millie's with cracked vinyl booths and bottomless coffee. We'd sit for an hour, sometimes 2. We talked about work, about the weather, about nothing. And slowly, very slowly, we talked about everything else. Nolan told me that Gerald had tried to get him to co-sign on a personal loan 2 years ago. He'd refused. Gerald stopped speaking to him for 4 months afterward. Just froze him out. No calls, no visits, no acknowledgement at family events. "I thought I'd done something wrong," Nolan said, stirring his coffee. "Took me a while to realize it was punishment." I told him about the letters, about Grandpa Earl writing to me for 3 years through Aunt Ruth, about how Gerald had told Earl I didn't want to see him anymore. Nolan stared at the table. "He played us against each other," he said, "our whole lives." "I know. He kept us separate so neither of us would compare notes. I know that too." We sat there for a long time, not talking, just sitting in the same booth, drinking the same coffee. It was the most comfortable silence I'd had with another person in years. We didn't lose our parents that Thanksgiving. We'd lost them long before. We just didn't have the language for it yet. What we found, sitting across from each other in a diner on Sunday mornings, was something we hadn't had since we were kids, each other. 2 months after Thanksgiving, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. My mother's number. I almost didn't answer, but something about the hour, Denise never called before 10, made me pick up. "I know you won't forgive us." Her voice was flat. No tears. No performance. For the first time in my life, my mother sounded like she was speaking without a script. "I just want you to know, I didn't want it to go this far." I leaned against my kitchen counter. "But you let it, Mom, every step." "I know. You called 8 relatives and told them I was a thief. You sat next to Dad while he waved a fake summons in front of our family. You helped him cut me off from my own grandfather." Silence. Long enough that I checked if the call had dropped. Then quietly, "I was afraid of losing the house. I know that's not enough. But that's what it was." I believed her. Not because it excused anything. It didn't. But because I'd seen that fear before. Denise Palmer had spent 35 years married to a man who made every crisis feel like the edge of a cliff. She was afraid. She was wrong. Both things were true. I need space, Mom, I said. A lot of it. Don't call me for a while. She said okay. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. Gerald never called. Not once. No text, no letter, no message through a relative. For the first time in 61 years, Gerald Palmer had nothing to say to anyone. I don't know if his silence was guilt or shame or just the absence of a plan. I spent a long time wondering. Then I stopped. I didn't slam the door. I just stopped holding it open. 4 months after Thanksgiving, I bought a house. Nothing fancy. A little 2-bedroom on Elm Street, a half-mile from the hospital. White siding, green door, a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs. 900 square feet. Built in 1978. I put down the money from Grandpa Earl's estate, $82,000, and qualified for the rest on my own credit. My score had climbed to 709 by then. The loan officer shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, Miss Palmer." No cosigner, no second name on the paperwork, just mine. The first night, I sat on the living room floor with a pizza box and a glass of sweet tea and looked at the bare walls. No furniture yet, no curtains, just clean carpet and the hum of a refrigerator I'd bought off Craigslist. I hung one thing that night, a framed photo of Grandpa Earl standing at Lake Blackshear with a fishing rod in one hand and a grin so wide you could count every one of his remaining teeth. I set it on a nail above the fireplace and stepped back. "Not bad, Grandpa," I said to the empty room. The next morning, I went to work at the hospital. Same shift, same scrubs, same parking lot where I'd once sat calculating how long until my father's debt crushed me. The math was different now. Rent was a mortgage, my mortgage, and the numbers worked. They finally worked. I visited Aunt Ruth every Saturday. She made coffee. I brought pound cake from the bakery on Main Street. We talked about Earl, the real Earl, not Gerald's version. She showed me photos I'd never seen. Earl at 20, in uniform. Earl at 50, building the house that Gerald would later steal. The house is small, 900 square feet, but every inch of it is mine. I'm not telling you this story because I think I'm brave. I'm telling it because for 10 years I thought endurance was the same thing as love. I thought saying yes to everything my parents asked, even when it hurt, even when it cost me, was what a good daughter does. I was wrong. A boundary isn't a wall, it's a door. You choose who gets to walk through it, and you choose when it closes. That's not cruelty. That's architecture. If you're in a situation like mine, if someone in your family is using love as currency, trading affection for compliance, making you feel guilty for protecting yourself, I need you to hear this. Saying no doesn't make you ungrateful. It doesn't make you cold or selfish or whatever word they reach for when they're losing their grip. It makes you someone who decided their own life matters. And if you have grandparents who are still here, call them. Not next week. Today. Don't let anyone else control that relationship. Don't let someone else decide what your grandparent knows about you or what you know about them. I lost 3 years with a man who loved me because my father decided I didn't deserve to know it. I can't get those years back. No amount of money fixes that. Do I still love my parents? Yes. I carry it the way you carry a scar. It's part of you, it shapes you, but you don't let it dictate where you walk. I just love myself more now. And that's not a sin. It's not betrayal. It's the bare minimum that took me 32 years to learn. I didn't win a war. I just stopped being a casualty. Here's where things stand today. The probate case is still working through the court. Gerald hasn't been charged criminally. The district attorney is reviewing the evidence, and these things move slowly in rural Georgia. I'm not pushing for it. If it happens, it happens. I've handed over what I have, and the system will do what the system does. Gerald and Denise still live in the house on Talmadge Road. They refinanced it clean. My name is gone. But the house feels smaller now, I imagine. Fewer people come by. Fewer calls to answer. The world they built with borrowed money and borrowed trust has contracted to the size of a kitchen table for 2. Nolan came over last weekend to help me paint the living room. He brought a pepperoni pizza and 2 cans of primer. We got more paint on ourselves than on the walls, but we got it done. We sat on the drop cloth afterward, eating cold pizza and not talking about our parents. We don't need to anymore. Aunt Ruth sent me something last week, a photograph I'd never seen. Earl holding me when I was 3 years old, at what looks like a 4th of July picnic. He's laughing. I'm holding a sparkler with both fists. On the back, in his handwriting, Ophi, Grandpa's proud of you. I taped it to the refrigerator, right next to my nursing license. My father tried to rewrite my grandfather's story. He forged a signature, stole a legacy, and silenced a dying man's wishes. He nearly rewrote mine too. But the truth, like a real signature, can't be forged. Not when the right people keep the original safe. That's my story. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. It means more than you know. If this hit close to home, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done at that Thanksgiving table? What would you have said? Drop it in the comments. And if you want another story like this one, there's one in the description that I think will stay with you just as long. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.